Nathaniel here from Make a Mess. Today's project is our baby penguin project. It's so sweet, he's so fluffy, and it's actually quite simple to do, so don't feel intimidated by this one. It may look a little bit tricky, but honestly, it's easy peasy and we will get through it. I have my art box here. I'm gonna open it up and show you what's inside. All the art boxes come with a printout step-by-step instruction. Just so you have a visual to sort of follow along with. And then they have all the tools that we need. We've got a dry brush, a detail brush, and oh, there's a foam dabber in here. And for the colors, this one has a really beautiful, cool palette, cool toned palette. So we've got two of these cool gray colors because we use a lot of it. And then we've got the beautiful turquoise color and a white and a black. It's a very limited palette, but it goes a long way, and look at how beautiful it looks when it's all together. Really, really great. And then of course our canvas is in here too. They always fit really snug into these boxes. So just take it carefully. And if you want to turn your box into an easel like this one is here, there's a YouTube video on this YouTube channel, so you can check that out, how to turn my box into an easel. It's very easy peasy, and that gives you the opportunity to work on a more vertical surface, or you can work flat, whatever is best for you. You will need some type of palette, so a little paint palette or even a paper plate works fine, a piece of cardboard, something you can pour some of your colors onto so that you can do some mixing. So we're going to start with the background of our canvas, which is basically going to be a fade from that cool gray color into a bit of the aqua for the sky. So I'm going to take the two colors and pour them into the palette. It doesn't have to be the whole paint pot, but a good amount. I put a lot of gray onto my palette, maybe like half of the turquoise. Just to get started. You may need to top it up, and that's fine if you do. That's what it's there for, but usually there's a bit of leftovers. So with our foam dabber, we're gonna soak up some of that turquoise paint. Besties. And we're gonna start at the top of our canvas and slide the dabber back and forth and back and forth, long strokes, and do the edges as you go. So if the turquoise hits that edge, you can just wrap it right around. And that goes for maybe about a quarter of the way down your painting, where it's just turquoise, and then we're going to start blending it into the gray. So now my brush has a lot of the turquoise on it still. These foam brushes really soak it in, and then they keep the paint in them for a long time. So I dipped a little bit in the turquoise to top it up, but not a ton, and then a tiny bit into the gray. With the gray facing downwards and then in the aqua color up, you're going to just blend back and forth to start making a sort of gray aqua blend of a color. And then the next dip is just going to be the gray. And I still have the aqua on my brush, so it'll kind of squeeze out of the brush and continue to fade downward. You can see how it's starting to fade in. And as you go down, then it'll just become more and more gray, and less of the aqua will come out of the brush. And if a little bit does here and there, that's fine. I'm still wrapping it around my edges. And then I'm just working my way right to the bottom of the page with just the gray. Long strokes. You kind of want to do this part quickly. It's ideal if you can keep the paint wet or from like fully drying and curing, because we're going to do kind of a fun technique. Hopefully it works. We're going to lift some of the paint for the moon. If it doesn't work, we can always use white. Depends on how quickly that you work. So what you want to do right now is, while your painting's wet, go wash your brush and squeeze the majority of the water out. Try and get it out, but it can be damp. That's fine. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go wash this real quick. Okay, I'm back. I have my foam dabber. And another thing, if you have just like a teeny little bit of water that you can have on the side for this step, it might be extra helpful. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to, with a wet dabber, I'm going to do my sun or my moon. I'm going to push down, spin it in a circle, and pull up. And it should lift your paint. It's kind of a cool technique. You may want to dry. Mine was drying for a little bit, so it didn't work perfectly. You may want to dry some of it off. I've got a little puddle of paint in that spin, so if you just dry it off a little bit, you can always revisit it and spin. So it just makes kind of a neat technique. I'm just kind of soaking up some of the extra water. I should have a paper towel and probably not use my sweater, but that's what I'm doing right now. Paper towel might be ideal. So not too much paint, or not too much water, sorry. That's what my situation was. It was just a little bit too wet, but I thought I needed it because my turquoise had dried. So I'm just going over my circle and gently spinning in the same spot, and then taking off some of the extra water. And look at how that turns out. Isn't that nice? So that's just kind of a lift. So it's the reverse of, like, the opposite way of doing this is just take a bit of white, dip your brush in white, push down, spin, pull up, which we do often for suns or for polka dots. But I just thought this might be a cool technique for you to see how you can also take the paint away. Bring that white from the canvas back. And then to do this sort of scratchy haze around the sun, ideally, again, your background is a little bit damp still. Mine is not, so I'm gonna dip it just a little bit in the water and see if we can lift it as well with this dry brush. So I'm using the dry brush, dipped it in water, and then I'm just dabbing it down to make it fluffy. And then I'm just gonna kind of scratch around my sun. If it doesn't work, don't panic. You can always just add white. Again, it's kind of like one way or the other is fine. I'm working in a circular motion. It seems to be lifting a little bit. Almost like I have to go over it a little bit where it's a bit drier, so that's okay. It's just kind of a neat technique to try. I'm always working in sort of a circle pattern. Again, a paper towel may be handy in this scenario. So that looks pretty cool. A little bit wet still, so you're seeing a bit of the glare. But you can do it as much or as little as you like. It's not, there's no right or wrong. It's just a kind of a fun technique to try out. So we're lifting the paint that way. So both with the foam dabber and with the dry brush and a teeny tiny bit of water. If your paint's really dry, really wet, you won't need the dry brush to be wet. So if you got through your fade really quickly and you're at this point and you're like, yeah, my background's still wet, you don't even need to wet it. Just do it with the dry brush and it'll lift the paint. Ideally, you can do that with both brushes, but if it is a little bit wet or dry like mine was, then you'll have to wet the brush just to dampen it and loosen it back up. Okay, give that a whirl. It's pretty fun. It's kind of neat to look at too. And then we'll get the white out. that'll be our next step. So once you have your sun on there with a bit of a scratchy sort of halo around it, this one's a little bit more scratchy. This one, it was wet still. I didn't need to wet the brush for this one. So you can see the difference. Oops. This one was wet. They still kind of both do neat effects. This one still is wet. It'll dry a little bit less vibrant. And alternatively, the third way you can do that is just by adding a teeny tiny bit of white, taking it off of your brush and just doing a gentle circle around your sun just to give it that like glowing effect. So there's lots of ways to get to that same look. So with the white, I'm going to do that now. I'm going to add in all these little like dry sort of glistening parts of the snow and ice where the penguins are going to stand and where it's sort of reflecting from the light. You can look at your second step in on your printout. The printouts are a little bit darker than the original, but you can at least kind of get the idea. So I'm dipping in the white, dabbing some off on my paper towel, and then I'm going to start going horizontally, kind of where the sun would be shining on the ice. It's really dry. You don't want a lot of paint here, and this is just a loose, playful, dry brushing effect. A little dip, dab some off. And then I'm going to start thinking like, okay, where am I going to put these little penguins in the background? Their spot's going to be a little bit brighter white and then maybe a bit drier underneath of it so that it fades kind of. They're going to stand over here on this little patch of snow, or maybe it's an iceberg or something. I don't know, something like that. And then the big main baby penguin, let's give him a little chunk of snow that kind of cuts off the corner at the bottom so that he can stand on that and we can give him some feet. It's okay if your gray and blue shows through. It doesn't have to be a solid white. It's a really loose, playful effect. And I'm even going to add in a little bit more of that. So it feels kind of frosty all in my, sort of my gray areas. I left the turquoise area pretty clear of the white because I feel like that's more the sky. And then little patches of the white is happening in the gray area because that's more like the ice. It might look something like this. Maybe a little bit more. I like making it look like the sun is kind of shining on the ice a bit, reflecting off those vertical or those horizontal lines there. You can do it until you love it. You may even want to layer. I'm just going to add that one a little bit more white so it has like a brighter spot where those little penguins are going to sit. And maybe I'll add a little bit of white on the top of where my baby penguin's going to sit. There, something like that looks good. Beauty. Okay, so we're gonna let that dry for a little bit, and or you can use a hair dryer if you want to speed things up, and then we'll move on to the next step. Let's look at the shapes of this penguin's body. So that's going to be our next step, and we're going to use our detail brush just to outline it, and afterwards we'll do all of our like shading and fluffy feathers with the dry brush. But let's just break down the shapes. So his body is kind of like an oval shape. It's rounded. It's a bit bigger at the bottom. It's kind of like an oval or maybe even a pear shape, but it doesn't really go in like a pear. So it's got a bit bigger of a bum, and it comes up into a little bit smaller of the top. A little bit triangular, but all round and ovally too. So make sure his body kind of comes down into a bit bigger of a bum, up into a circle of an oval. I'm going to do this on my canvas and show you too. I just want to break it down. And then his head is kind of a circle shape. Might have a slight bit of a point, teeny tiny bit, but it's mainly just like a circle that's going to sit on top of this like oval shape with a bigger bottom. And then his wings are also just like ovals, and then the tips come to a point. So it's like an oval with a little bit of a point. And this guy, this wing comes from the opposite side of his body. So if his shoulder's here, it's actually like coming from over here, but on the opposite side. And it's just going to come out kind of like a little loop. A little whoop, comes out from the body just a bit and then back in. And obviously his beak is a nice triangle shape. So let's do that on our canvas. Using the white and the detail brush, we're going to start outlining. Okay, stop that and then start it again because the light is screwed up. Action. Using the white and your detail brush, we're going to start outlining the shapes that we just spoke of for the baby penguin's body. So let's give him a nice big oval shaped body. Now with these brushes, these detail brushes, I'm just dipping the tip, and you always want to pull away from the tip of the brush. And the harder you push on the brush, the thicker your line is going to be. So if you want a thinner line, just push it gently. If you want it to be a bit thicker, then you can push a little harder. So see, it's kind of like an egg shape, his body. Oops, let me bring them up just a bit. You can always go a little bit bigger. It's harder to go a bit smaller, but you can go a bit bigger. I'm working in white, so if you did screw up, you could kind of blend it into your ice in the background too. This guy's a little bit chubbier than my other one, but that's okay. There we go. So he's gonna have a cute little chubby body, like so. So it's kind of like an egg. Bigger at the bottom, smaller at the top. Kind of like oval-y. Now we're gonna put his head on. So his head's gonna be a circle shape. You're gonna cut the bottom of the circle is gonna kind of cut into the top of the oval, or the egg. And his head's gonna come up. Like so. And you can see these shapes on your reference sheet too. Bring his head up just a bit more. And then we can put a little triangle in for his beak. Coming together. And his wings get that like oval shape, so it's gonna come up. His shoulder, pretend his shoulder's kind of right at the top where almost where his head meets. So I just kind of did a wing where it came down the side to a point and then up. You don't really need the top of the oval, but you can put it in there if you want. Doesn't matter, we're gonna fill it all in anyway. And then his other little wing's gonna come a little bit lower. It starts a little bit lower because it's attaching to his shoulder behind him. And it's gonna come out. And it goes a little bit lower than the other one. Something like that. Kind of into a point. Let me bring this guy up just a bit more. My penguin's kind of chubby. There. Now in his face, and if you look at your reference sheet, and I'm just gonna grab my reference sheet for you. So see how his face has this little white section? I kind of outlined it in the reference sheet too, just so that once we start filling in, it makes it a little bit easier. So from your beak, you can kind of get to that point by doing an inside triangle. Like imagine this triangle flipping in. Inside triangle. That comes down, up, and then around. This part's a little bit straighter. Doesn't have to be perfect, just needs like a white section for his face. They're all gonna be a little bit different anyway. something like so. And then you might want to adjust a bit. I think I'm going to bring his shoulder here out a little bit more and start kind of looking at him. Maybe you might want to just soften the line of his neck here so it doesn't go like a snowman where it goes like in and out. You just kind of do that on both sides, make him a little bit softer. And maybe a bit of his foot kind of comes in a little bit like this. We'll add his feet in underneath after, but I wanted his belly to kind of flop over his foot a bit. There. Something like that's a great start to our shape of our penguin, and he's going to really come together once we start adding in the shading and the dry brushing. Okay, now it's time to start really making our little penguin come to life. We're going to use our dry brush, so that one we used for the snow. And it's going to make the little like prickly, like fluffy feathers by just dabbing. And the colors of the penguin, although he's very gray, it's not the gray that we use for the background. There is lots of that extra gray in case you need more, but or if you want to mix it in with the tones of your penguin, you totally can. But I used mostly white and black to make the penguin. And if you have gray in your palette and you want to use that to give it a little bit of extra tone, that's fine too. So I'm going to start with my white and just do the white areas of the penguin first. So let's look at this. Original. So we're going to do his face area, and then we'll start into his wings. So let's start there, and we'll work our way into the gray tones. So with this brush, you're just gonna dab. I'm gonna bring this a bit closer so you can see. And you're gonna dab. Fluffy little penguin. The white of his face is the whitest part. So you can go over your lines a little bit if you need to. Because you don't want to see the lines really. So that's going to be the brightest part, or it's pure white. And then once we get into his wings, we're going to fill them in with white. Dab, 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 dab. And then just along the inside part of the wing, I'm going to dip in the white, dab some on my palette, and then like the teeniest, tiniest bit of black, like teeny, tiny. And then add that in along, I'm still dabbing, along the edge of the inside of the penguin's wing. And that's gonna start giving it a shadow. So although that wing is white, it has a little darker edge so that we can sort of see it pop from off of his white and gray kind of belly. And I'm just going right up to where his armpit would be. Put something like that. And we'll do the same thing for the other wing too. So I'm dipping in the white. If there's still a little bit of black on your brush, don't panic, because that guy's gonna get a lot of that deeper tone in there anyway. But we're gonna dab him in with the white. If you go into your body a bit, that's okay. You can always go over it. We're gonna fill the body in anyway. Dab, 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 dab. And it's okay to like very carefully let some of your dabbing just slightly overlap your line. So it almost looks like little feathers are crossing over the line. It gives that funny fluffy texture. So your lines aren't perfectly straight, but very, very slightly. And then I'm dipping in my black now and some white to make a darker gray value. And I'm gonna put this on the inside of his wing. Always dabbing and blending. And I'm actually like going right on top of the white I just did. There, he's looking cute. Okay, so this time I'm dipping in a good amount of black, but I still have white on my brush. I'm gonna dab a little bit off on my palette. Kind of pushes the paint up into the brush when you do that. And I'm gonna see what I've got for a gray tone. Oh, it's a little bit dark, so I'm gonna add just a bit of white. I want a good dark gray tone for the bottom of the penguin's body. And I'm just dabbing. And I'm gonna work my way up into a lighter tone as you go. So let's look at the original. See how he's pretty dark all in here, all around his wing. And then his belly area is gonna be like a lighter value of gray. And then we'll kind of blend into his head again. So right around his belly is gonna be the lightest gray, not quite white like his wings or his face. It's still a gray, and you can still see lots of like texture. It's kind of blendies of different grays in there. And then like a deeper gray around the bottom for the shadow, which is what we're doing now. So we're doing that deeper gray. If you like that blue gray that we have and you want to incorporate it, you can double dip into that a little bit too. It does look nice with that. That's fine. I'm just sticking to black and white. So every time I dip, I'm dipping both in the black and the white. So you can kind of see that it makes different gray tones in there. And that's what makes it feel more fluffy and realistic. You don't want it to all be the same gray. And although we want it to be darker around the bottom and getting lighter as we go up, see I dipped into the black, you can see a little darker. It doesn't mean we want it to be like a perfect gradient, because we want it to have that fluffy feather feel, those cute little baby penguin fluffy feathers. And when I'm going around my outside edge, I'm holding the brush angled a little bit so that the tip of my brush is actually going around the lines in the body. And then the rest of it can just fall into the center of the body. It doesn't really matter as much what happens to that part. You just want to watch, really watch the edge of your brush with the edge of your penguin's body. See, I went into my wing a little here. That's fine. I'll touch that up after. Don't sweat the small stuff. Dab, dab, dab. It's just so cute. And even some of that gray might show through from the background. Don't worry about that too much. And I'm dipping a little bit more into my white. So that was just a dip in white, but you can see my brush was already so gray that once I dipped into the white, I can kind of spread it out. And it'll give you that lighter gray that we're after for his belly. Looking cute. Again, I just dipped into the white, placing the white where I know I want it to go, sort of in his chest and belly area, and then dabbing my way out. I'm gonna make it a little bit darker, just slightly under, like over by his wing. Again, I'm going close with these dry brushes. When I'm going close to a line, I'm just kind of dabbing gently and making sure I'm lining up the edge of my brush. I'm just watching the edge of my brush in here. Yeah, I just made it a bit darker because I think it really makes his wing pop off when you do that. There we go. And then kind of blending it in. I'm gonna do that same thing over here where this wing's kind of casting a bit of a shadow. Just careful, getting close to it. Okay, see how it's like, it's a big dark line. Don't worry about that. I'm taking some of that off from the table over here, fluffing my brush up a little bit, adding a tiny bit of white, dabbing that a little off, and then blending it in. And when you go over it, as long as it's still wet, you'll be able to easily blend it into the color you want by adding in the white and kind of pulling it across your painting. Look at his cute fluffy belly. And then those darker tones end up coming back up again in here because he's gonna attach to like his black cap. Dipping in the white, doing his chest nice and bright and white, falling right up to that white from his head. And I'm kind of letting a little bit of the gray overlap onto his white feathers on his head, just because it keeps that nice fluffy texture to see some of that playfulness come into his head, his face. And now that I've gotten up into here, I'm gonna dip into the black and bring the black all the way around his head. Really carefully. Watch the edges of your brush for this step because there's not a lot of room. So notice that when I'm on the outside edge, my brush is angled inwards. And when I'm on the inside edge, it's angled. It's always angled in towards where you want the paint to go so that you're watching the edge of your brush so you don't go out of your lines. If you're nervous about getting into those little tiny parts in there, you can switch to your detail brush if you wanted and just kind of fill it in. That's fine. I'm going to switch to my detail brush anyway because it's time to do his beak. So I've got my detail brush and I'm just going to fill in his beak with that because it's much easier than trying to get that dry brush in this tight little area. And it's almost a diamond shape, his beak. And the other thing is when you change your brush, your strokes are going to be a little bit more smooth now because of the different brush. I'm putting the tip of the brush into the beak and then pulling away. But what's nice about that is it gives us that nice beak texture where before it was really fluffy. Now his beak can be a little bit more smooth. I just noticed over here I didn't blend this very well, so I'm going to just go back over it and kind of blend it in. I didn't even dip again. I just had a little bit of black left on my brush and I'm just blending it in. So it looks something like that. And I really like what's happening in here where you can see the texture, like I was saying, over top of the white. So I'm going to allow that to happen a little bit more up in this area too, because I want them to look really fluffy. There's no right or wrong. Do it till you love it. I think he's looking pretty good. I just took most of my dark off my brush and I'm just gonna add a little bit of, I added just white, but it kind of still took over. And so you can see that it's still kind of a bit gray, but I don't mind having that gray in there a little bit. I think it's actually helping to show the form of his arm a little bit. So that's fine. I'm just dipping over top of it to blend it down a bit. There, oh, he's looking so cute. Cute little fluffy penguin. If you feel like you need some areas to be a bit more highlighted, you can go over them with the white. Fix up your fluffies a bit if you want to. There, something like that. He's adorable. Let's let him dry and then we'll do his eyes and his feet once he's dry a bit. And while we're waiting, we'll work on these little penguins over here. You might want to grab your reference sheet for these guys so that you can really look at, there's a bit of a zoomed in picture of their shapes. Now we're going to break them down into geometric shapes. And remember, they're just silhouettes, so you don't have to worry too much about detail. So if we start with this guy, he's just a big tilted oval shape. And then I pull the little tail in, a little foot. I put a circle for his head and a triangle for his beak. So with your detail brush, you're going to dip in the black. Remember with these brushes, the harder you push, the thicker your line is going to be. So if you just want a thin line, just don't push very hard at all. You just want it to be like a thin little gentle line. This project really makes us have a lesson on brush control. We really want to be gentle. You don't have to push hard at all. I'm barely pushing. I'm just letting the top of my brush, just the tip of the brush, touch the canvas. So that's my general shape. It's going to be like a big long oval and then a little circle for his head. And then I'm going to do just a teeny tiny pull for his beak. It's a triangle shape, but if you put the tip of your brush out where you want the tip of his beak and then barely push and just pull in, you can usually get about a triangle shape just from one brush stroke. And then his little tail kind of fluffs out the back a little bit like this. So fill in your shape and then see where you're at from there. You might need to like puff up his chest a bit, or fix a little bit something here and there, but that's fine. Once he's filled in, you can see his silhouette, And you can see what he needs to make him look a little more penguin-y. I think this guy needs a bit more volume in his shoulder and then maybe a bit more in his chest too. I'm just going to connect that. If you see it as you go like I'm doing, then just edit it as you go, or you can fill it all in and then look at it, which is usually the easier way to do it, but I've had lots of practice and I can see where I need it as I was going. There we go. He's gonna have a nice puffy chest. And maybe his foot is really just like a little line that goes this way. Can't really see what's happening. There. One little penguin silhouette. Now, I would recommend blow drying in between because you're doing little detailed penguins and you don't want to put your hand on the other one and smudge them. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give this a quick blow dry and then we'll do the next one. Okay, our next little penguin that we're doing is this guy. And his oval, his shape is kind of a straight up and down oval, circle on the top, and his beak is just angled and pointing upwards a little bit to the left. And then his tail, the tail's always going to be the opposite of the beak. So if the beak's on one side, the tail's on the other, right? Beak's on one side, tail's on the other. Same with this guy. So all their shapes are very similar. They're just ovals with circle heads and then filling in the details like the beaks, the tails, and the wings. Okay, so this guy's going to be right next to this one. He's going to have a long oval shaped body. I'm just dipping the tip of my brush in my paint and I'm barely pushing so that I don't have a really thick line. Really, really want to emphasize that. You don't want to do a thick line because these brushes can look at how easily they can make a thick line. That's just me pushing, see? You don't want that to happen. It's okay because it's on the inside of his body. And I was just trying to demonstrate, but you don't want really thick lines for these little tiny details here. So I've got his long oval body and his little circular head. And then he's gonna have just a teeny beak going upwards. And again, I'm barely even pushing. I'm just putting the tip of my brush into the tip of the beak, and then I'm pulling down gently, not pushing hard at all. And then actually, like, it pulls some of the paint into his head when you do that, and I just took that paint and pulled it throughout the rest of his body shape. You don't need a lot of paint for these little guys. It's really, really crucial that you're barely putting any paint and barely any pressure on your brush. So this guy has a couple of wings. His wings come from the shoulder area, and it's just like a brush stroke that comes out. And then another one on the other side. You can thicken it a little bit if you need to. And he's got a little tail that kind of comes out this way. And a little foot that's over here. Maybe a tiny bit of a leg showing. Something like that. Chippy win. And then our third little silhouetted penguin, same idea. He's going to be a long oval shape, like so. Slightly tilted, maybe. A little circular head on top. And a tiny little pull for his beak, barely pushing there. If you do have a situation where you push too hard on the beak or you go outside your line or something and you need to fix it up, you can afterwards, when it's all really dry, you can go back over around the outside a little bit with a bit of the white and a bit of the gray and kind of try to outline it a bit and touch it up if you really have to. Not an ideal situation, but I actually did it for the original too because there was a little spot I wanted to touch up. You can't really tell. So the nice thing about acrylics is you can always go over top of them. Okay, and this guy's gonna have a little foot coming out this way. Oops, let's see. See, like that part right there was a little bit of a mess up. I didn't really want it there, so I'm just gonna make it slightly a bit fatter. And then he's kind of got a wing that comes in just a bit on this guy. You can put that in, or you can just leave it like a belly. It's fine either way. There! 3 little penguins in the background. Aren't they cute? 1, 2, 3. Well, we're zoomed right in. We're gonna do our eye and our beak on our baby penguin. He should be nice and dry by now. Again, I'm still using the detail brush. And if it's getting kind of like fluffy or out of shape at all, with a paper towel, I'm just gonna do it with my fingers, but with a paper towel, you can give it a pinch and stick all the bristles back together. I call this sharpening a brush. It gets a nice point back on your paintbrush, and all your bristles are stuck together, and then it takes all the excess paint off as well. And then I'm just dipping the tip of my brush in very, very, very little bit of paint. And remember, not push hard at all. And I'm just gonna extend where the diamond in the inside of his body from the beak, remember the diamond shape? And extend that just a tiny bit with a line. And then I'm gonna flip my paintbrush over and dip in the back of the brush. And I'm gonna give him an eyeball kind of up in this area. And I'm just kind of giving it a little bit of a circle, a little bit of an oval even. And back to my brush. And I'm gonna do a little pull from either side so that it makes more of an eyeball shape. So it's like kind of an oval circle, and then you can just kind of give it a point on either side and then connect it. It's a really easy way to make an eye. So it's a circle and then a little line on each side and kind of just connecting it into that eye shape. Then these lines are a little tricky. So with very little paint on your brush, you're barely gonna push and you're just gonna do like a tiny little line above the eye, a tiny, teeny, tiny, gentle line underneath the eye. Okay, so let that dry a little bit. We're gonna come back and highlight that. Wipe your brush off on a paper towel, dip it into the white. And it's okay if it's not perfectly white or, you know, if it's a little tiny bit gray, that's fine. And we're gonna highlight his beak just a bit. So I'm gonna put a little bit of white coming up this way because this is our light. Our light's reflecting onto his beak. And I'm also gonna give him like a little nostril in here and kind of show where the top of his beak might be. And I haven't dipped again, so I just did a little bit, and then I'm letting it sort of be almost a dry brush so that it's kind of gray toned in here and some of the black is showing through. And it makes the tip of his beak just a little bit brighter. And it gives the bottom of his beak, which would be like his bottom part of his mouth, a little bit darker. And if you want to elaborate that a little bit more, if you want it to stand out just a bit more, you can always go back over that bottom part of the beak with some black just to pop it even more. Like so. Oh, he's really cute. The other thing you can do while you have your detail brush here is I dipped a teeny tiny bit in the black, and you can add like a few little feathery fluffies if you want to add a bit of detail, a teeny tiny bit. I'm just going to give him like a few around his neck area. Again, I barely have any pain and I'm barely pushing. It's just light, light, light. And I'm just giving him kind of like a few little fluffs around his neck. Nothing major. If you feel like you need to outline his wing a teeny tiny bit, you can pull a bit of black underneath his wing. You may have gotten that enough from your shadow. So you can just make that call, whatever you think would look best for your art piece. Kind of the top of his head up here is a bit of white. I'm just going to gently cover that up too. It's just an opportunity to go in with a smaller brush. I'm kind of using a little fluffy on the end of the brush to make him have a few feathers sticking up. So it still looks like that same dry brush technique. Faking it in there. Might give him a little bit more over here too. There, he's looking cute as a button. Okay, so let his eye fully dry before we add the highlight in, and we're gonna switch down to his feet. Okay, his little penguin toes, I'm dipping just the edge of my brush in, and I'm doing kind of like 3 little sausages. Oh, my brush needs to be sharpened. You can see that it's not all sticking together, so I'm just dipping my brush in there. Paper towel is ideal, but here I go using my fingers again, because that's what I do, I make a mess, and then you'll re-dip just the tip of your brush in. So with a new nice sharp brush, I'm going underneath his feathers here and giving him 3 small little sausage shaped toes that are all just kind of one after the other next to each other. This guy, maybe he'll come out a little bit like that. And it kind of looks funny, I know, seems weird, but it comes together, I promise. And then I'm gonna give them a little tiny claw on the end of each one. They can start like in the talon or the claw, whatever it's called, a little bit inside his toe, and then pull it down a little. And then with the black again, I'm gonna do that over here. These guys might not show as much, maybe they're underneath his body a bit more. Just gonna kind of add them in here. These ones are a bit more just like little round toes sticking out, not as long, because we see a bit more of the side of his foot for the other one. Like so. And then I'm gonna mix a teeny bit of gray on my palette. So I've got black already on my brush. I just dipped into the white, and on the side I'm just mixing a tiny bit of gray. And then I'm gonna fill the toes in with some gray. And if some of the black blends in with it that you just had, if it's wet, that's fine. Here's something like that. And then I'm gonna take the black again, and I'm gonna shadow kind of underneath his body and add a little bit of black onto his toes, like it's casting a bit of a shadow from his fluffy body. And I'm gonna add a teeny bit of those little black feathers in underneath his body, like I did up around his neck, just to pop the shape of his body, like that. And then maybe they come around a little bit in here. I wanted this part of it to kind of hang over, remember? Missed that a little bit, but that's okay. There we go. I'm just gonna add those in. And if they're too black, you know what to do. We just blend it down with a little bit of gray. Maybe that's a little too much. You can always rework it and just kind of blend it out. Here, fade it in a little. Cute little guy. Maybe I'll throw a couple little shadies in here. Bam! Little toes. Cute little toes. They don't need to be too detailed. You don't need to bring a ton of attention to them. Okay, the very last step is the back of your brush. You're gonna dip it in ever so carefully into the white, teeny, teeny, tiny. You're gonna look at your light source and think, where's that light gonna hit his eye? Put it on his beak. We're gonna just add the smallest white dot in the top part of his eye. And look how he comes to life just like that. He's so cute. Oh, cute little penguin. And like that, our little penguin project is complete. Aren't they adorable? They turned out so cute. It's funny how I did both projects, and they're both penguins are a little bit different. They have their own personality, and it's my favorite part. Every painting's always different. And they're so cute. What are you gonna name your little penguin? Drop it in the comments. I don't know, maybe Peter and Paula? Something with a P? Pingu? Oh, they're cute. I hope you had fun doing this painting, and I look forward to painting with you again. Make sure you follow us on our socials, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and right here on YouTube, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the art lessons. Until next time, I'm Nathana from Make a Mess. Thank you for painting with me. Bye.